Welcome to Funding and Disrupting, the most in-depth business podcast for technology companies looking to raise capital and the venture capital firms that fund them. We interview venture capital firm managing partners and tech company founders to get the real story of how it all came together. If you're searching for funding for a disruptive or innovative technology, or you're searching for the best companies to invest in, then you've come to the right place. Now, let's get funding and disrupting with our host, Keith Herman.
Hello, everyone. Welcome. I am your host, Keith Herman. Today marks an exciting milestone for Funding and Disrupting. We are excited to announce our very first interview that includes both a female VC firm founder and female tech company founder. Our VC firm guest is Dr. Melody Lang, the founder of the MPA Learning Fund, and our tech company founder is Vivi Friedgut, the CEO and founder of Blackbullion. Briefly, MPA is an investment fund backing purpose-driven companies focused on the future of learning and work with the ambition to make large-scale impact. They want to give everybody a chance to fulfill their life purpose by offering them the education, the tools, the self-awareness, the growth mindset, and the empowerment. And Blackbullion is a financial well-being platform that equips young people with money skills for life and improves access to funds. Available to 1 million plus students at almost 50 partner universities and colleges across the UK, Ireland, Australia, New Zealand, and South Africa. Their platform is deeply embedded into the student support departments to help with funds distribution and provide financial education, giving students the skills and confidence to create a money-smart future. So with that, let's welcome Melody and Vivi to the podcast. Hello, Melody and Vivi. How are you today?
Hi, very well, thank you.
Me too. All good. All caffeinated up.
All caffeinated up. Okay. Well, Melody, I'd like to start with you and an interesting piece of information I found out about you. You have a foundation degree in yacht and boat design. Can you share with us exactly what that is and what motivated you to pursue it?
Absolutely. So what I've been told since I was born, or since I could understand when people talk to me, by my mother was, whatever happens, do something you love and be financially independent. So what I love is mathematics. So that's what I read at uni and went for a math degree. And then I thought, well, what do I do with that? And then I thought, well, I also love sailing. So let's put the two together. And that's how I had my first job in the south of France, working for a yacht design company, doing all of the calculations around aero hydrodynamics, stability, speed performance that, yes, I was also being taught in the different physics and fluid mechanics module I had embedded in my math degree. So the thing is that I was a little bit envious that I could see my colleagues being able to also do the drawings and of these boats. So I started teaching myself how to use AutoCAD and went for a distance learning degree in the US around yacht design. So that's how it all got about.
So you have a master's degree in mathematics and a doctorate degree in mechanical engineering. I believe that qualifies you as the smartest person I've interviewed so far on the podcast. Is that a common reaction when people become aware of your educational history?
It is. And I was actually shy using that title, that doctor title. I'm like, no, that's fine. I don't need to use that in front of my name. And then when someone said, no, you need to use it. And when I saw the power it had, I'm like, okay, then. And so it has definitely got an impact. And now being, well, you'll hear more about my journey, but going then into LearnTech and as an operator and a founder, and then moving onto an investor role, somehow having a math degree and a PhD in mechanical engineering gives you additional credibility. So, yeah.
So with all the technical education you have, why get into venture capital?
So after my PhD in mechanical engineering, I thought, wait a second, a career in academia, going for a postdoc, not sure. I know I'm a nerd, but I consider myself a social nerd. I need to talk to people and have sort of human interactions. So I didn't think a postdoc would fulfill that need. And then working in engineering consultancy, there was also something that didn't feel right. So I took a bit of a step back and realized I had such a strong passion and interest in the whole education and learning industry, getting overly frustrated by a traditional system that hasn't been updated since the Industrial Revolution, that I thought, okay, education, but where would I fit in? And I thought ed tech, learn tech, that keeps this sort of geeky side to that I think would be a good fit for my profile. And it started as an operator, basically. Started as an operator in an edtech company headquartered in New York that raised over $150 million. And I was the first hire outside of the US to join the London team and stayed there for 4 years before I got approached by a VC fund who wanted someone with my edtech industry expertise and network to help them with their investments in edtech. So it was very opportunistic. It was not pre-planned. It just happened. I had had a good 4-year operator's experience there and thought, okay, maybe I'm up for a new challenge. And that's how I joined the whole VC industry.
Melody, tell us more about MPA Fund and what makes it unique.
What happened is that I could see, first of all, that when founders in EdTech and LearnTech came to pitch their business to me, I was the first investor they were talking to who understood what they were talking about. And they left my office like they had a 1-hour strategy session and 2 introductions out of it. So that created tremendous traction from the whole industry to have a highly strategic investor on their cap table. And they came knocking on my door. So MPA is different in the sense that we consider ourselves an operator investor in a specific industry, which is LearnTech. So giving that operational support from product to strategy, partnerships, but also access to a vast network I was able to develop over the years and making sure I can open the right doors at the right time, which I think is key for founders. So that's that. And then obviously the impact angle. It's about values alignment. And MPA, by the way, are the core letters of the word impact. So it's at the core of everything we do. And so that's where also we differentiate ourselves from more traditional VC investors who may be less impact focused, if you will.
So Vivi, let's have you chime in here. Tell us how you learned about MPA Learning Fund and got introduced to Melody.
And just to tell you, Keith, she is really smart. It's not just on paper. She actually is really smart and also really nice. So you got to hate her just on spec, really. But Melody's fabulous. We actually met before she became an investor in Blackbullion at our kind of last round of funding. And Melody messaged me and she was like, "I have to invest in your company." And we are a female founded business. I'm a sole founder. It was purely an ed tech. We're now much more of a fintech. So it's not exactly the Mark Zuckerberg, cookie cutter type of investment. And so people knocking on my door wanting to invest was a whole new experience. And when Melody and I kind of spoke that first time, I think what kind of really impressed me is a lot of what she's kind of saying now, but it's actually baked into how she looks at the world are some of the things that are really important to me. So impact obviously is fundamental to what we do. Our commercial objectives and our business objectives are completely aligned with our impact objectives. We can't do well as a business if we're not helping students to do better with their money. So it's not possible for us to succeed if other people are not benefiting from our business. And Melody just got that, which a lot of investors don't. And the idea that you can do good and you can do well, you can build a massive business and also create a positive impact on the world was something that Melody kind of instinctively could see that we were heading towards that. We're a kind of slow and steady, sustainable business. And Melody kind of got that off the beginning rather than just like, I want to see 100% year-on-year growth, which a lot of investors do, and then say that they're impact investors. So that was the real difference that I picked up from Melody. In some ways, it's the yin to my yang, I think, in a lot of ways. So it's been great working with her.
Vivi, so clearly Melody's fund has a very unique approach because they approach it from a place of awareness. When you initially met, so I'm assuming you spoke on the phone maybe or remotely, and then eventually you met. Is that the case?
We met pretty quickly, actually. It was
Okay. So
right. We met up pretty quickly. Yeah.
Yeah, we met in person, at this event where you pitched.
Yeah, the event. Yeah.
So let's talk about that meeting. Okay, so you spoke to somebody, you spoke to Melody on the phone. She's all excited. You're probably thinking it's too good to be true. Talk to us like what it was like when you first met. Like what were you feeling? What was going on? With the initial interactions between the two of you.
Yeah, I could say that I played it really cool, but I don't tend to do that. I get excited when other people are excited about what I'm building. But what I guess kind of struck me at the basic level is that Melody's an operator, which a lot of funders are not. So a lot of funders are great at what they do, but they're ex-management consulting. They've made a lot of money and are now working in VCs. And as much as people want to be empathic, if they haven't been on the founder journey and built a business, it's very difficult to know what it's like if you haven't done it. Your understanding of time pressure is very different. Your understanding of budgets is very different. The stress levels are very different. And because Melody's an operator, that meant that we were automatically talking the same language. So when I think we started quite deep, actually, like what are the challenges and where do we want to go and those kinds of questions. And I could phrase it without trying to also explain that it's stressful and also explain, the mental health side of it and the exhaustion, and building a team is very, is very stressful and time consuming. And when you're talking to an operator who gets it, it's just at a different level conversation. You're not trying to pretend like it's easy because they know that it's not. So they would call BS on you if you were pretending. So I think it was just quite a quick, if it was a dating thing, you'd be like, there was just great chemistry from the first minute, right? I think, I don't know if Melody thinks otherwise.
We're gonna find out here.
That's I think where I kind of came from, was she got it on a human level and she got it on a business level. And I think that's, you don't have that with most investors. You just don't.
So Melody, what was it that you were so excited about? What, obviously Blackbullion, they've got something that's unique, but what was it that, got you so excited to have you reach out and pursue Vivi?
Well, it's Vivi herself. That's a very, very straight and honest answer. So I saw Vivi pitched the business, and then she left the room because we were a group of investors in the room back in the days to discuss the opportunity. And then we were like, wow. And so at some point, someone says, well, you know what? I don't care if she pivots the business 10 times. I'm investing in her because she's going to make it happen no matter what. And I'm like, yes, you couldn't have said it better. I'm with you on that one. And for me, Vivi is one of the most impressive founders I know. And the way I would describe it, she's a powerhouse. And levels of resilience that you have no idea, and that obviously founders need and require. So aside from that energy and that sort of powerhouse personality, it's also the vision and the fact that not only has she got a very, very big vision, but she's also extremely grounded, feet on the floor, and building a business, not for a valuation necessarily, but the valuation comes with the business. One of those founders who understand that profitability is the basis of a business, and that is fully aligned with our values at MPA. So these businesses who create a lot of hype and want to grow their user base without generating a single dollar in revenue, it's like, that's fine, we'll monetize them later. I've seen too many businesses who then struggle to monetize their user base as big as it could have been. So I'm way more comfortable as an investor to back a founder that's very grounded in the way they're building their businesses, extremely lean in terms of running costs. So extremely sort of super capital efficient. And lastly, just a detail of the business itself is the fact that they've got a negative customer acquisition cost. What business has got that? Excuse me. So building a whole system to acquire their users who are students, 17 to 24-year-olds, by getting higher ed institutions pay for their solutions that they put in the hands of the students, but they have no choice because that's how they unlock the funds that the university need to deliver to those students. So like, how clever is that, right? So anyway, many different reasons, but down to the person, Vivi as a founder for me is a powerhouse.
So Vivi, why don't you tell us what you're up to at Blackbullion?
I'm just upset my mum isn't like on this call to hear all of these lovely compliments. So Blackbullion started with a really kind of singular vision, which in the US has been around for ages, this idea of financial literacy. In the US, the lexicon has existed for a long time. We really brought it to the UK. There's a handful of charities that do financial education, financial literacy, but it's never been kind of processized, if you forgive the horrible Silicon Valley language. And so I started with the vision that if young people are better with their money, everybody else is better off. The young person is better off. They're less likely to drop out of education. They're more likely to go into education. They're more likely to be good consumers of financial services, which is great in general for the sector. People who are financially literate have pensions and investments and homes and the like. And so that was kind of the initial vision, was we're just going to help people learn about this stuff. And then it kind of evolved into learning is great, but I know that I should eat less chocolate and get more sleep, but it doesn't mean that I actually do it. So how do we put the action into the hands of students? And we discovered that universities were making learning a compulsory part of students applying for funding on campus. There's tens of millions of pounds of funding that gets given to students. And they were saying, Keith, we'll give you the money that you ask for, but you have to learn this budgeting and debt, for example, before we'll give you the money. And we looked at their processes for doing it, and they were just out of the 1970s. I mean, it was embarrassing. So we built out a system in order to create an efficiency tool with it. And then they were saying to us, well, actually, the slow bit is getting the money into the hands of the students. So we built out a payments facility within it. And then we said, well, actually, looking towards the US, scholarships are a huge market. There's kind of $100 billion worth of scholarships that are available for young people. And in the UK, that market size is 20 million, which is like nothing when you've got 2 million students. So we bought a scholarship company earlier on in this year to bring that all together. So we're creating like this ecosystem, although it's a very overused word, we're creating an ecosystem for students with the medium-term vision of basically reimagining what the financial stack looks like for students. So accessing funding, spending money well, acquiring, as many funds as possible, and then moving out into the workplace, which again is why MPA is such a great fit for us, because it closes some of these gaps in the ecosystem. So bringing students into money, helping them use it well, find as much as they can, and then graduate out into the so-called real world, where having those skills can have a real deep world impact. So that's the small vision: make everybody financially literate everywhere in the world.
So when partnering with the scholarship program, what was behind that? Why did you decide to do that?
Yeah, so it was, I think, a proper boss move, I'm going to say, because we bought the company while we were at the beginning of a next fundraising round, or just about to kick one off. So that was an interesting move strategically. But I was convinced that people who are of lower financial means budget better than all of us. I don't shop around for my milk, because if it's an extra 10p or less 5p, it makes no difference to my money. Poorer people budget extraordinarily well. The challenge that a lot of students have is budgeting, but is also they just don't have enough cash. There is a very expensive life that they're living. Rents are skyrocketing. Cost of living is happening. And so we were looking at how do we support these students, not just by helping them to use money best, but actually to access more money. And universities have limited pots of money. They just do. And so where else can the money come from? Government isn't suddenly going to write checks for students. The volume is simply too high. And actually, I believe that the future of work is going to see a greater alignment between corporate Britain and civil Britain, because the money is, a lot of it's in corporate. There's pipelines that people want to build. There's diversity elements that people want to lean into. And so actually, let's encourage them to take a greater interest in the future workforce by putting their money where their mouth is. And that was really the thinking. And we'd been kind of keeping a close eye on this particular scholarship company, which was the largest in the country. And then the founder, towards the back end of 2021, called me and was like, I'm thinking about selling. Do you want to buy? And I absolutely jumped at it. And the board basically signed it off immediately. So that's nearly killed me, the process. But it was absolutely the right move, because now the cost of living has hit and students are in even more need than they were in before.
So, Melody, how would you describe the due diligence process for Blackbullion? In other words, if you think in terms of a timeline, what did you ask them for, and in what kind of order? You know, what was in a timeline sense? How did you work with them, and what were the things that you asked of them?
So once I have analyzed the fact that there's a need, I mean, they're tackling the right challenge, they're really identified the need, and their solution makes sense to me. The first thing I look at is obviously the team, the people, and that's where Vivi comes in, and that's where, as she described it earlier, it's about chemistry, it's about a match. You know, I don't know how to explain it, because there's something that's beyond some rational sort of analysis of a match. It just clicks. You're aligned, you're thinking the same language. Yeah, done. Then the second thing, obviously, it goes also with obviously the match, but it's make sure there is alignment on values. And by values, I also mean that she is driven by purpose. And what I look at in terms of process is that the companies I'm backing need to address at least one of the 3 UN SDGs around quality education and decent work for all, also good health and well-being. And actually, now that I think about it, Blackbullion is actually covering the 3 of them with our solution. So tick. Then the third criteria is about scalability and growth. So we want to see indicators of scalability so we can have the biggest impact possible. And we could see that when obviously a solution is tech enabled, and you can easily scale it. And lastly, it's trust. And trust is about the transparency I want to have between me as an investor and the founder. And I saw it too many times where founders tell a different story to their investor, and they say what the investor wants to hear, but are not fully transparent. And how can an investor like ourselves, for instance, who are extremely high touch support, can help these founders if they don't tell us when they're in a low or if they need help? So these are the 4 criteria, I would say: team, purpose, growth, and trust. Yeah, that would be what I look at. But obviously, I'm not talking about the legal DD and so on. But anyways, at the early stage of Blackbullion, when backing Blackbullion, we came in as co-investors. So then you can share that load with others.
Vivi, what was the process like? What did they ask of you?
Due diligence is always fun. I think it helps. I'm the world's worst liar because I have the world's worst memory. So I find, if nothing else, just tell the truth because it's easier to remember. And I have seen a number of founders who, you know, overblow their numbers or underemphasize some of the issues. And then when due diligence happens, if there's even halfway decent DD, it all comes out and explodes in their face. So right at the beginning, I was like, we're going to talk about the good, the bad, and the ugly, just because it makes my life kind of easier. I think with Melody in the first instance, like not this round now, but the initial investment, the due diligence was not like the worst thing in the world, because we also, so much of it is, I think, about gut and instinct, and then proving that your gut and instinct are right, because you don't have that much DD to do. Like, you've got a team, you've got some numbers, but no one's digging into the EBITDA for the last 10 years to see if it like does what it should do. And as we are growing and as we're raising more money, and we have more metrics, the due diligence becomes more kind of intensive. What I think's been quite interesting is that our investors, and it's part of the reason we select them and we work with them, really know the business. So there's not surprising things that come out in due diligence, because I send monthly updates and tell them where we are at and highlight some of the stuff that hasn't gone well. So the due diligence is kind of just the big update, because you're getting all of these little ones as you go. And Melody and I speak regularly. I mean, she's probably one of my top 20 WhatsApp people. So I'm quite happy to message her and go, I've got this challenge, or I need this thing. Are you able to help me? So it was fairly straightforward, but I would imagine that when we go towards a Series A, depending on who comes in at that point, the due diligence may look very different, especially because also the market has turned. And again, because we've always been consistent with our capital efficiency and we've really looked at hardcore metrics, the behavior that others are kind of falling into now, where they're having to behave like it's a bear market, we've always operated like that. So none of this has really been a huge surprise. I feel like the market has now caught up to where Melody has always been and where Blackbullion has always been. Like, proper metrics, tell the truth, ask for help when you need it. And that's what due diligence is all about.
Did you have to rely on any particular third parties for the due diligence? Did you have an attorney? Did you have, was there anybody else involved?
I mean, obviously there's lawyers involved in everything, better here than in the US, but we're definitely starting to catch up with that. But the deal, I mean, the data room I put together on Dropbox gave access to people, put in all of the documents that we needed. I don't think we used any third parties except for the lawyers when we got to the point where we were drafting term sheets or, reviewing term sheets and things like that. No. But again, I'm not sure that'll be true at the next round. But that certainly was true at this point.
Melody, tell us why you believe purpose, self-awareness, mindset, and empowerment are so important.
Because I think it's at the core of many challenges society is facing. And what I mean by that is all these increasing number of burnouts, depression. And I think it's because from the day we're born, we're being formatted. We're formatted by our parents, by society, and we're put on these tracks and we don't even realize it. And then at some point, eventually, we wake up. And if we
hopefully.
Yes, hopefully. My observations is that very often it happens if you've got some type of transformative event in your life. So maybe in my case, it was my divorce. Maybe in someone else's case, it would be the loss of a parent. So, but hopefully I hope that you don't have to go through such traumatic transformative event to sort of wake up and gain that self-awareness of, wait a second, what am I doing here? So an example could be, working as a consultant in a company, or I don't know, not being in the right place that is not a good match or a good fit. So for what you should be doing, or that's, not aligned with, you're not at your best, basically. You're just being formatted into that role. So if you're familiar with the philosophy around Ikigai, it's a good one, because then you would think, okay, what am I passionate about? But okay, it's great to be passionate about that, but if I can't live up that, that's going to be a bit of an issue. And so it's finding that sense, that sense of purpose in your life. So because I believe that if you're in the right place as a result of self-awareness and that introspection work, then that's how you'd be fulfilled. And it can be all sorts of different things for anybody. You can be happier. I mean, we don't need all to be in the city working corporate jobs. That's what I'm saying. So there are a vast array of options that sometimes we're not even aware of because we're being put on these sort of tracks.
Vivi, what advice would you like to share with other entrepreneurs that perhaps have a big vision, but perhaps don't have all the skills to execute their business plan?
The first is to recognize you're never going to have all the skills you need to execute your business plan. The one thing I wish somebody had told me was that every 6 months, you'll have to completely review and reimagine certain elements of how you do things. The manager that I am today is very different to who I was a year ago. The leader I am today is very different. The way I operate, all of these things, that's like my biggest tip to founders is always get good at what you do and know that in 6 months it's going to be different, what you're going to need to do, and try and anticipate the horizon as much as is possible. And if you can get that right, then you manage to remove or at least mitigate some of the risk. I do a pre-mortem of Blackbullion every 12 months, looking at, it's literally like an address to myself, like, dear Vivi, I'm sorry the business failed. Here's the reason that happened, so that we can try and keep on top of what are the risks to the business. And I really encourage people to do it. Like, what are the regulatory risks? What happens if the market suddenly turns? We did a new one at the beginning of COVID and then put together a battle plan to avoid it. So just trying as much as possible to keep an eye on the horizon and prepare yourself, but also at the very basic level, test things with clients before, ideally have clients before you build anything, if you're able to do that. Surround yourself with as good a people as you are able to hire and are able to afford. There's so much. Get good advisors around you who you can be honest with. My best friend wanted to invest in the business and I said no, because I need someone to fall apart with when I'm having a bad day, and you don't want to do that with people whose money you've taken. So I think it's just a very human job. It's so much about people. 80% of my day now is about managing the team and leading and keeping the vision at the front. But my biggest piece of advice, if you don't have a burning need and a burning passion to do what you're doing, do something different, because this is really hard and it's relentless and it's 24/7 and it's lonely, no matter who else you have around you. At the end of the day, it's a really lonely job. It's not for everyone. In fact, I'd venture it's not for the vast majority of people. The best way to build personal wealth is to get a good job at Goldman Sachs, get promoted every couple of years, spend less than you make, save, invest, take your holidays. This is not this. People say to me, oh, you've now got all like work-life balance. What a big fat lie that is. If you think there's work-life balance, you're in the wrong profession. So those would be like my pieces of advice. Don't do it unless you feel that if you don't do it, like your life isn't worth living. I mean, that's very hyperbolic, but that's really how I feel.
Melody, tell us how MPA is working with Vivi to support her vision of the company, and also how are you working with her as the CEO?
So it's a mix of things. So that's how I like to call MPA the sort of the boutique expert investor. Boutique in the sense that we're extremely high touch in the support we give our founders. And that's why we'd rather invest in fewer companies to make sure we can give that high quality level of support and help. So with Vivi, an example could be to go for breakfast with Vivi and just fully brainstorm together around strategy and maybe longer term vision and what could it become. It can be when I scan and read so many different things, maybe she doesn't see everything that's happening, although she sees quite 99% because she's very active on everywhere. Anyways, if I come across companies or an article or something that's like, oh my gosh, and I forward it immediately to Vivi, do you know about that? Do you know about that company? Have you heard about it? And in other instances, actually, it's like, oh, do you know that company? But I know the founder. I just met the founder. I sat next to the founder over dinner, whatever. Do you want an introduction? So I'm proactively sending these pieces of information to Vivi, leave it or take it, but at least she's always at the forefront of sort of my thing in my mind. And well, the fact that we're connecting on WhatsApp tells you something, because for me, that's sort of, I normally tend to keep work-related discussions on Slack and email, but to have my 8 founders on WhatsApp, it shows you how close to them I am, and that I always think all the time how to help them, introducing them to the right people, yes, so a lot of that, leveraging my network. And yeah, I mean, it's quite, there's no standardized way of doing this. It's very much if and when needed. And like today, that's it. I've invited Vivi on this podcast. That's me thinking of Vivi. Who do you want to invite as a founder? Vivi, come along.
Well, I'd like to share some information. There was a recent PitchBook survey that revealed that the US VC deal value for female founders reached $32.4 billion through the third quarter of 2022, already raising more capital than any year prior for the record high set in 2021. And on the check writing front, the numbers underscore that the industry is still a long way from equal gender and diversity representation. Female investors account for just 16.1% of VC decision makers in the US. And furthermore, 95.5% of VC firms have a majority male population of decision makers. So with that in mind, Melody, what advice would you give to other women that are interested in entering the venture capital space?
Gosh, well, it's encouraging that these numbers are increasing. I agree with you. We're still far from equality there. What would be my advice for is just to do a bit of reading and understand everything around imposter syndrome, because that's what we suffer from as women. I don't know why. There's something where I don't know if it's a lack of self-worth, or I'm not good enough. I mean, maybe that's sometimes my case. So that's why I talk from personal experience.
What just briefly,
Yeah.
just for the audience, tell us about imposter syndrome, because this is something that we hear, increasingly, every day, more and more we hear about this. So why don't you just tell us real quickly what that's about?
So very concretely, in my case, it's like, oh my gosh, wait a second. You've never applied your mathematics to finance. You've applied that to physics and science. So who are you to say you know anything about finance and can be an investor? Look at these other people. It's always some comparative stuff, right? Look at these other investors. They went to do some bachelor's, master's in whatever finance, or they. So it's really, so that's why it's really a mix of I'm not good enough mixed together with imposter syndrome. Who am I to take that role of investor and claiming I'm an investor? And between you and me, I mean, we all know early stage investing is not rocket science. And that's why I very happily hand over my companies to other investors if they were to raise a Series B plus. I'm not pretending I'm that investor and that type of investor. So I'm a pre-Series A investor. So over time, I got very comfortable with who I was, the value I could add to the companies I invest in, and why I should no longer suffer from that imposter syndrome. But when I first joined the VC firm I worked for back in 2018, you see all of sort of different sort of profile types. And back to the gender, I was one of the only women, and so that's where you feel you're a bit out of place. So yeah.
Right. But the challenge is people are just challenging you in your credentials, but you're more than qualified. I mean, in your particular case, what we're talking about, you're more than qualified. But generally speaking, imposter syndrome, unfortunately, is projected onto people by other people who probably have insecurities and probably have their own issues, who are, projecting their shortcomings onto you, correct?
Yes, that's a very good point and way to look at it, indeed.
Yeah. So I just want to, because a lot of people hear about it, but they don't really know what it's about. So yeah, so you have nothing to second guess yourself on there. So Melody, or actually Vivi, let me ask you this. What advice would you give female tech founders that are looking for venture capital? Because now that you've gotten venture capital, you're not friends and family, right? It's different. So what advice would you give to female tech founders considering partnering with a VC firm?
Yeah, it is a very different game when you're pitching institutional investors versus even family offices. There's a couple of pieces of kind of guidance that I would give. The first is don't raise until you have to. And Melody and I have discussed this. I think only raise, and certainly institutional money, to power the engine, not to build it, because it's a very hard journey. So do it when you're best positioned to do it. Specifically for women, the first is just accept it's going to be more difficult. It makes the journey a lot easier if you know it's going to be difficult. Stop listening to the narrative as much as possible. It's a negative narrative, which, not to blame women for it, but we need to get out of our own way as well. I recently spoke at a conference, a money conference for women, and a lot of it was like, this isn't fair and that isn't, and all of that is true, but it's not helpful. That's not like a helpful approach. The best way to make change really is to be the change, not to like use Gandhi to death. But we have had 2-to-1 female engineers applying for our engineering roles, which never happens. So, be the change, recognize it's going to be difficult. Don't listen to the narrative. Keep your eyes on your ball, solve your problems. Because the more women there are who are founders, the more women there are who are investors, the more the game will change. And change on a societal level moves really slowly. That's also just a reality of history and a reality of human behavior. But also don't quit. Like, don't be the person who stands in your way. We had 71 rejections for this round, 71. You got to just keep going. You got to say, bring it on, and stand back up again and go for the 72nd and go for the 73rd and keep going. And again, if you're not going to be able to do that, don't start, because it is debilitating, and it does make you question your worth. And people say it's not personal, it's business. When you're a founder, everything's personal. You have to be able to stand back up again. And if you can't do that, then don't start the journey to begin with. Look at other sources of funding. But if you find one great VC, and if that great VC happens to be a woman, then some of these things do just become easier, because they get it. I don't have to overcompensate for Melody the way I might if Melody was a man. And again, that's not a judgment call. That's simply the reality of the world in which we live, which doesn't mean we can't change it, but you got to call it by its name to change it.
Melody, how may future investors, strategic partners, or tech companies reach you if they're interested in working with MPA Learning Fund?
Okay, so you can find me on LinkedIn under Dr. Melody Lang, Melody with a Y, and I really am looking at the reach out from the LinkedIn messaging, because I'm not that person who would only reply to warm introductions. But what I would ask, though, is to mention in your message that you heard me on the Funding and Disrupting podcast. That's extremely helpful for me to know. And that would be my favorite way. I'd rather, and then I would, of course, give you my email address then, but I'd rather go through LinkedIn first. It's a massive shortcut for me to then look you up, understand, and get that context before we can then engage in a conversation.
And how about you, Vivi? How can people get in touch with you to learn more about Blackbullion?
So LinkedIn is also good for me. There's not that many Vivis on the LinkedIn platform, but if you look me up on LinkedIn, otherwise I'm also on Twitter, I'm also on Instagram, although to be fair, that is mostly cakes, so I'm not really sure if that's kind of where people want to be going. Those are usually the best ways to reach me, is through the social channels.
Now, Vivi, just so that we're clear, on LinkedIn you appear as Vivi, Vivi.
Yes.
And your last name is spelled?
Is Friedgut, which is spelled fried gut. And I've heard every possible insult, so don't even bother with that. But Vivi Friedgut, spelled fried gut, at Blackbullion, and you'll easily find me on LinkedIn.
Terrific. Well, thank you both for sharing your story and your experience with us today. It's been an absolute pleasure to have you both here. And
Thanks.
we welcome you. We wish you all the best in your endeavors. And a big thanks to our devoted audience and their interest in these interviews. We're working to diligently improve every aspect of funding and disrupting, and welcome comments. You may do so at fundingdisrupting.com.
Thank you for joining us on this episode of Funding and Disrupting. Don't forget to visit our sponsor, auraco.com, to learn more about working directly with Aura Collective's exclusive technology PR team. They'll help you craft your message, get noticed in the press, and help you get your venture to the funding finish line. Again, you can visit them at www.auraco.com. Keep funding and keep disrupting.